Hey everyone, I'm Joseph, and this video we're going to talk about game platforms and player modes. Let's get started. So game platforms, there are a lot of them, and in this class we're going to take a look at them not just from a player's point of view, but also from a developer's point of view, or a publisher's point of view. All right, so we have uh, arcades, PC, console, handheld, online, mobile, and don't forget tabletop, right? And I have an asterisk here on all of them. Every one of these platforms is going to have multiple manufacturers and models and a lot of changes in each one. Just because you choose a platform doesn't mean your choices are done, not by a long shot. Right? We have a lot of choices even in each one. Right, so we're going to start with arcades first. And arcade games, they're going to have a manufacturer that builds the physical device itself, right? That manufacturer has presumably would have the copyright on their hardware, right? They may figure out some deal with the publisher or something to share or relinquish copyrights, but probably not. They're going to maintain copyrights of their product, right? Then the game developer is going to build the game that goes on the hardware, okay? And then generally with arcade games, at least in the past, there's always a venue operator. Um, there's less and less of these in recent times, so some people are actually collecting arcade games at home as a bit of a novelty. Probably not more than just a few in a home. Even if you're a collector, most people have none of these, right? These are really big. They take up a lot of room. They're not cheap. They only play one game. If you want to play another game, uh, in older times, you would have to swap out the entire, well, you swap out the motherboard, not all of the hardware. The screen can stay the same. But you have to swap out the hardware. In newer ones, there is probably some software solutions for these as well. But these would have to be brand new ones. Generally, arcades are going to be purpose built for that one game. Right? So if you're choosing to develop a game for an arcade, uh, good news is you have pretty much complete control over how that machine is going to look, the capabilities of the machine. Um, you're going to converse with the manufacturer and say this machine needs to have XYZ specifications, and it's going to look and feel like this, and it's either going to be a standing box like this one, or maybe it's going to have like a scope with a sniper rifle, or it's going to be multiplayer, or what have you. The developers and the publishers are going to have a lot of control over the look of these, but you're still not going to sell too many of them because people aren't going to have them in their houses, not very often. Next, the PC platform. PC platform, you're not going to worry about the manufacturer that much because people just, buy PCs. They're manufactured by all sort of PC companies, whether they're for gaming or not, right? So you don't have to deal with the manufacturer. You're just the developer. You're building software that fits on the machine. However, you have to set some sort of recommended and minimum specs for your game. So you're building a brand new game. If it's going to be like a AAA title or something, you need to find what is the minimum computer that you want to be able to, the minimum set of hardware that you want this game to be able to run on. You need to choose that pretty early on in development. You don't want to get partway through in development, near the end, and say, oh, we need to change our recommended specs because of XYZ, and now you're making a game that doesn't run on the most popular devices, and then you're going to limit your fan base because people can't play it until they buy a new computer. And although some people are very excited to buy a new computer, most people are not going to buy a computer right away just so they can play your game. So you need to somehow balance your minimum specs and your recommended specs so that when your game is finished, you might develop your game for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 years. Right? So you need to decide what your recommended specs are even pretty early on, at least make some broad strokes on that, and then build your game. And hopefully, when it finishes, it's still relevant and it's still achievable by the vast majority of your players. Right? Also, to consider as a developer is that every PC is different, even if it meets those recommended specs. Let's say you say, my minimum and recommended specs, I want XYZ processor and XYZ graphics card. But then there's also the RAM, there's the motherboard capabilities, there's the hard drive or the solid state drive, or there's whether or not it's going to even have a disk drive these days, as so many computers don't anymore. There's a lot of specs in there, that a lot of pieces of hardware that will change between two computers, even from the same company, even from a similar model. You can get the same model computer with 2, 3 different processor choices, or 2, 3 different graphics card choices, 2, 3 different levels of RAM, sizes of hard drives, whether it's a hard disk or a solid state drive. A lot of different specs that can be on a PC. And when you choose your minimum specs and your recommended specs, you need to be aware that people are going to be running what they think is actually your minimum, but maybe they have a different motherboard and has a different internal bandwidth or something, and theirs doesn't play like yours does. So that's a consideration that has to be taken into account. All right, moving on to consoles. All right, loads of different consoles to choose from over the years. Generally, there's a limited number at any one time. But now we have the hardware manufacturer to consider again. If you are making a game for a Nintendo console, you have to get permission from Nintendo in order to publish it on their console. They are notorious for being a little bit more picky. They don't like to have too many adult games on their systems. They are kind of opening it up in current times, but historically they have been much more reserved to kid-friendly games and family-friendly games. Other hardware manufacturers have been more open, but you still have to pay the licensing to them. They can deny you licensing if they choose to. Okay. And you're going to develop to their hardware and their fan base as well. That's another consideration you have to choose with consoles, is the majority of households don't have all the consoles. Right? So currently, between Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo, the big consoles right now, the majority of people don't have all 3 of those consoles, or if they do, they're probably not going to have the most recent model of all 3 of them either. So not too many people walking around with the newest Xbox, the newest PlayStation, and the Switch. Certainly are still a lot of them, but the majority of people have 1 or 2 consoles to choose from. So you have to choose your fan base. And one of the ways that manufacturers and developers do this is they have exclusive titles between the different consoles. So XYZ game only is released for Xbox, or it's only released for Sony. And so if you have a collection of exclusive titles for one and a collection of exclusive titles for another, if your game is a competitor of one of those titles, then maybe you want to focus your energy on the alternate platform so you can capture the fans who want to play a similar game but they don't have the other platform. Right? So a lot of things to think about as a developer, as a publisher. Um, Also, every console is different, right? Not in the ways that PCs were different. PCs are different. They have all these different hardware things. There's a lot less consoles to choose from. So there's the PlayStation, the Xbox, and the Switch. Uh, each of those have their own hardware specifications. They have their own processing power. They have their own RAM, graphics, all that. But they also have their own um, form factor as well. So if you're making a Switch game, now you have a touchscreen, you have portability, you have a different set of buttons, you have a motion capture controller, you have big screen, small screen. You have a lot of options on the Switch that you don't have on either the Xbox or the PlayStation. Um, Either of those will still have some peripherals, right? Some accessories that you might be able to get. It's not too many right now, but in the past there used to be a lot of them. It used to be like light zappers and motion things and all kinds of stuff. These are all things that have to be considered. Whether or not it plays any effect on your particular game, that's dependent on your game. Not all games have the necessity to take advantage of motion control or touchscreens or any of that. Um, and so they don't have to consider that difference between the consoles, but yours might. Moving on to handheld games. All right, my favorite current platform, the Nintendo Switch. I think it's amazing because it has everything. It has the portable and the docking station, right? But handhelds don't traditionally have the docking station, right? They're going to operate pretty much just like uh, the regular consoles, except that now they're portable. Now they have a different form factor. They have a completely different fan base, right? Traditionally, the portable gaming uh, fan base has been younger than the TV living room gaming fan base. All right. And they have a much limited hardware capabilities. They're running on battery power. They can't have a super high-end CPU that sucks up all the energy because they won't be able to play for very long unless they were plugged in. And if you're plugged in, then you're kind of defeating the purpose of being a handheld portable device. So it's a requirement that they have lower power consumption, and that means less processing graphics capability. Um, but and they have different multiplayer capabilities as well. Potentially, they could have Bluetooth multiplayer, or they could. It's theoretical that they could have a different, a homegrown type of multiplayer where you can play with people that are in the room with you, um, versus consoles will have to rely on online multiplayer, which is in the old days, the consoles did not have that, but for quite a few years now they have. Right. Next one is online only games. Okay, we have this is a component of many of the other platforms, right? Not really the arcade platform, but pretty much all the other platforms have the online component. This may or may not play a part in a game that you are developing, right? You may be playing, you may be building a single player campaign game that does not have online capabilities, doesn't need it, or you may be playing, um, building a game that is going to have only online capabilities. So you're not going to be able to play it offline, right? So this, again, you have to consider the fan base. If you're developing its game, whether it's online or offline or some sort of hybrid, and also hardware capabilities. Um, More and more people have a super fast internet connection now, so you don't necessarily have to worry about that as much as you did before. But you still do, you have to program your game in such a way that it still uses the least amount of bandwidth necessary in order to achieve your goal so that the most number of players can enjoy your game simultaneously without running into lag issues that everyone is going to complain about. And then last, another big thing that you do have to worry about, um, you kind of have to worry about it in the other platforms, but you really have to consider what the laws are in different countries for online gaming. For example, if your game has loot boxes, what countries is that completely illegal in? And what countries can you do that in, right? It is completely illegal to have loot boxes in some countries, and the laws are always changing on that. People are getting upset about one thing or another. So this is a real big deal. Once you go online, anybody in the world can play your game. Uh, and if they're playing it in a country where something about your game uh, has some legal issues, uh, they're not going to get in very much trouble. You are. So this is something you have to be take into consideration. What is my next one here? Mobile games. Right, mobile games, again, you're all going to have that different country issue, presumably. Um, but now mobile games, if you're having either an Android or an iOS device, you're going to have a minimum operating system version. All right, you're not going to worry, you are still going to worry about hardware capabilities, but now you have to worry about the minimum operating system version. And that's because for example, as Android progresses through the different versions, so for quite a long time, the most popular version of Android was Jelly Bean. Um, and all the games were being made with that as the minimum version. But as the new versions came out, and we're quite a few versions away from Jelly Bean now, um, the capabilities of the operating system itself grew, and the functions that you could use as a programmer grew. So if you build a game that requires a Android 8 or 9 and somebody tries to play it on 7, it might work if you don't use any of the new functions that were introduced in version 8 or 9. But if you use even one of them, you're going to have problems. And they're probably not even going to be able to install it because it is pretty convenient. Android is going to tell you, hey, you can't properly play this game before you even install it. But you need to be aware of the capabilities of each version during development or before development, and be aware of what functionality you're using and building into your game so that you know exactly what the minimum version is. Right? You want to build your game to operate on the oldest version possible while still providing all the features and functions that you need for your game. So sometimes it could be a delicate balance. It's usually not that big of a deal. You just pick the most recent popular version and go with it. Another huge consideration for mobile are the controls, right? Touchscreen controls, they take up screen real estate in a big way. People are tapping where they're looking, where they're trying to walk around, and they're covering up the screen with their own fingers. That's a huge deal, can be a huge deal. You could require they connect a Bluetooth controller to their mobile device. You're going to really limit your fan base though, because how many people actually have a Bluetooth controller and want to connect it to their phone so they can play a mobile game while they're riding the bus or something, or the train, or whatever they're doing, right? So you really have to take that into consideration. A big issue with mobile games, and it's a similar issue that we read about in a previous chapter that happened in the 80s, was something called shovelware. Right? Back then it was really cheap and easy to just build a game, any game, doesn't even have to work, and just publish it and send it off and ship it and make some money because people are going to buy your game because they think it's cool, and they're not going to find out until they get home that it's not. With mobile games, we're having shovelware again. There are literally millions of games published on either the Google Store or the Apple Store, and the bar to entry to make a game or an app and get it published is very low. Monetarily speaking, it's slightly higher on Apple. Their last I checked, it was like 125 bucks a year to have a publisher's license on Apple, whereas Google, it was, I think, only $25 to have a permanent license to publish games on the Google Play Store. And then when you publish a game, you put it up there, and there is a review process on your games in terms of uh, you're going to get that rating that you wanted. So, for example, I made a game, put it on there, and very difficult to get a low rating if you have even cartoon graphics. Okay, nothing graphic, um, but if you have like emojis in that, that kind of thing, if it has even the most, um, if it has something that they determine is not like an E for everyone, you're not going to get that. You're going to have to get like the 14 or something, or even the M for mature or something. And there's little you can do about that unless you're a big company. You can probably, get some lawyers to talk to them about it or whatever, or just change the nature of your game, change the graphics, change the language, whatever it is that's causing that. Trouble is they're not going to tell you exactly what it was that caused that rating. So if there's like, you're just going to have to work with it. So shovelware is a big issue because the bar to entry is so low on mobile platforms. Anybody with a few bucks can get a game published, and it doesn't even actually have to work. And then last couple of things they have on here are mobile games are they going to be always connected to the internet? That's not a requirement because not all mobile devices are always connected to the internet, right? If it's a phone, you can be sure that they probably do have a data plan, but maybe they play while they have some downtime at work, and they're like, the break room is in a place that doesn't get a very good signal or something, so they're not. Can they play your game? Do they need a reliable signal to play it at all times, or don't they? That really significantly has to do with what your game is and how it communicates. Many games, every action that you do communicates back to a central server and then back to the device again, so that to prevent cheating, so that they know exactly everything that you do, and you're not just running some app on your device that cheats the game, right? And then last is ads. Are you going to put ads in your game? Are you not going to put ads in your game? That's a huge. The developers are not going to figure this out. The publishers are going to make that decision, right? They're going to say, all right, what is our monetary decision on this game? How are we going to make money? Are we going to sell items in the game? Are we going to do microtransactions? Are we going to put ads in the game? Are we going to do both? Is the game itself going to cost money to download, or is it going to be a free download? Those are all decisions that the developing company is not necessarily going to make. It's the publishing company that's going to make. And we'll talk more about the difference between those in a later chapter. Moving on, tabletop games. Don't forget about these. Okay. Pictured here is a game called Seven Wonders. Really great tabletop game. I play with my friends every so often. Really nice. But tabletop games, you're developing that, you have to consider a completely different set of things than you would on all the electronic games, right? Now we don't have hardware and software. Now we have physical objects. We have the physical moving pieces. We have cards, dice. Are there going to be miniatures? Is there really a board, or is there not a board? Maybe it's a tabletop game. So Seven Wonders here, there aren't any miniatures. I don't think there's a dice. I can't remember that. I know there's no dice. There's a lot of cards. There's cardboard pieces, and there's board pieces for the players. Okay, and then there's a rule book, right? Depending on your game, your rule book might be like an encyclopedia, or it might be like a church flyer size, right? It could be really big or really small. Um, but the tabletop game has a completely different set of considerations in order to make. Oftentimes, if you're making a new game and you're worried about numbers and balance and things, sometimes developers in the early stages will make a tabletop version of the game that they can kind of walk through and they can figure out um, figure out some of the mechanics of the game, right? Some of the things that happen during a turn and that for any type of turn-based games. Okay, you can make a tabletop game and you can slowly walk through what needs to happen in the turns. Um, and that's really going to help to try and figure that out and lay it all down and think about it before you program it and you start writing hundreds and thousands of lines of code that might not work because you didn't plan ahead, right? So tabletop games are a platform themselves, but they also are used sometimes as a development function early on in development to kind of narrow down how the features and functions work in the game. All right. So those are all the platforms. Next, we're going to talk about player modes, and we're going to do it all in this one slide. All right. So the different player modes, starting with single player. So the simplest of player modes is one player plays against the computer, player versus enemy or player versus environment, PvE. One player against the computer, no online capability. If it's a mobile game, it may be phoning home for your commands, but that that doesn't necessarily mean you have what most people would consider an online game. Okay, you and I know it's online because it has to be online, but there's not a an interactive online component with other players. It is single player mode. Okay. Once you introduce other players, now we have multiplayer modes, and there are a number of options we can have in multiplayer modes. So my personal favorite is a local couch co-op multiplayer mode. This has a lot of significant hardware and software issues that you might not have thought about. For example, if you program a game, let's say it's a top-down game, or let's say it's a first-person game, and you put it a single player game, you build that game, you have a first person camera that follows the player around, they do their actions, they have the menus, they do all that stuff. Now you have a local couch co-op 2-player game, and you have to split that screen into 2 pieces or 4 pieces even. And now you have to somehow program a way to have 4 cameras following 4 players with 4 sets of menus and display that on the screen and not mess it up. It it can be quite a headache. A lot of games, modern games, are not made with local couch co-op simply because the graphics and the processing needs of having to do 2 of everything on one computer, it just is unreasonable and it can't happen anymore because we're pushing our devices to the limits with only one player on one device, that it is just not going to work to have to do 2 of everything or 4 of everything. Okay. So that's one type of multiplayer. It's a lot of fun to literally and physically sit next to your friend while you're playing a game together. The next best option is a LAN multiplayer, where multiple devices are connected together on a local network, and you solve the hardware and software issue of the local multiplayer, where one device is not powerful enough to do 2 of everything. You just have the network now, and the network sends messages back and forth to tell you the actions of the players, what they're doing, where their position is, what enemies they're attacking, all that kind of information. And now multiple people can play together, and they each have their own screen, they each have their own device. They don't necessarily have to be in the same room. You just have to be on the same network. Okay. And moving on, that network could be the internet itself, and now it's an online multiplayer game where people can sit in their own homes or in their offices at work when they're on break, hopefully when they're on break, um, and they're playing. It's essentially it's exactly the same as the LAN multiplayer, except now we're using the internet itself as the network. Um, and so that's a single player in the multiplayer, and within the multiplayer, also we can choose whether players are playing cooperatively, that is, two or more players are playing together on a team against either the computer as computer enemies or the environment, or other players who are themselves playing together cooperatively against you. So team based. So it could be two players playing together against the computer, or it could be multiple players playing against other multiple players. Right? Um, so that's cooperatively, either as a team against another team or as a team against a computer. And then the last is player versus player. And this, again, this could be cooperatively in teams or singularly as one player against another player, or one player against 99 other players in the popular battle royale games. Those are the playing modes. And oh, there's no homework. Not on this slide. Not in this presentation. All right, those are the platforms and player modes. All right, thanks for watching, and enjoy your day.